Prince, he is coming.
Just before stepping into the sunlight, the man suddenly stopped, as if the sunlight before him were a raging beast. Unbeknownst to him, this scene was witnessed by Lucian from a distance. Seeing this, Dracula barely managed to keep his composure, quickly nodded in greeting, and then turned away swiftly. But Lucian was already intrigued and immediately followed him. In his panic, Dracula entered a blacksmith's shop, only to find there was no back door. As he searched for another way out, Lucian appeared behind him. The blacksmith in the shop, upon hearing the word vampire, was immediately terrified. Eliminating vampires was Lucian's duty, and Dracula understood this, but with a powerful enemy outside, he, as a prince, could not surrender at this moment. Seeing Dracula's attempt to resist, Lucian immediately drew his sword and cut the cloth curtain that Dracula was using to block the sunlight. Dracula's skin began to burn and rot under the sunlight. Seeing this, the common people and soldiers all surrounded him, holding torches, trying to burn Dracula, who had turned into a vampire, to death. In the face of malicious verbal attacks, torches were thrown into the blacksmith's shop. As the fire grew, the air quickly filled with the smell of ashes. Accompanied by the helpless cries of his wife Marina, a plume of black smoke rose from the blacksmith's shop, quickly obscuring the sun above. Then, Dracula emerged from the ruins, unharmed except for the traces of burns from the sunlight. Seeing the people he had painstakingly protected who had turned against him, Dracula was furious and asked them why they were doing this.
This is your loyalty, your gratitude. Fools, do you think you are alive because you can fight? You are alive because of me!
Marina understood Dracula's grievance and went up to comfort him gently. If he had been treated this way, Dracula could only vent his anger and then let it go for the time being. The Turkish army was about to arrive at the city, and Dracula had no other choice. The reason he chose to become a vampire was related to the upcoming war. In the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Turkish Empire was waging wars everywhere, and under the threat of bloodshed and weapons, countless small countries had to choose to join them. To express their sincerity, the young Dracula was sent to the Turkish king as a hostage by his father. He, along with many other hostages, began to receive inhuman training. After experiencing a bloody baptism, Dracula became a member of the war. Due to his bravery in battle, he once fought alone against hundreds of people and later impaled the enemy's bodies on stakes, earning him the nickname Impaler Prince. After coming of age, Dracula's mind gradually matured, and he began to hate war and loathe his hands being stained with blood. So he bid farewell to his old friend, now the Turkish Sultan Mehmed, and returned to his own country, Transylvania. Later, Dracula married and had children, living a happy and fulfilling life, but this life didn't last long. Dracula discovered a Turkish scout's helmet in a small stream in his territory. Having grown up in Turkey, he knew that their scouts would never act alone, so he immediately ordered his trusted aide to return and strengthen the defenses in various parts of the territory. He himself, along with 2 subordinates, went to search upstream of the small stream. At the end was a peak called Broken Cliff Mountain. On the mountainside, Dracula discovered a cave. The cave was pitch black and emitted a foul odor, not seeming like a place where people could hide. But to be safe, Dracula decided to search it. As they were about to enter the cave, a group of bats suddenly rushed out, scaring his subordinates pale, but Dracula suddenly became serious. So they drew their weapons and entered the cave, one after another. As the torch was lit, they finally saw the surroundings. Turkish armor scattered on the ground and human remains that had turned to dust. Further into the cave, it was filled with skulls. It seemed that Dracula's guess was correct. The Turkish scouts had indeed hidden in the cave, but for some unknown reason, they had never come out again. The 3 were amazed by this discovery, but didn't realize they had already been targeted. The subordinate in the front was the first to sense something was wrong, but it was too late. The mysterious creature suddenly rushed out, followed by a scream. After hearing the sound, Dracula instantly remembered the rumors he had heard and realized that monsters really existed. He immediately fled with a subordinate, but the opponent was clearly faster. After running a few steps, the subordinate behind him was killed. Dracula swung his sword to fight back, but was no match at all. He used all his strength to move towards the cave entrance, picking up the fallen weapon to block in front of him. Just a few steps away, the monster stopped and slowly retreated into the darkness. Although he had grown up on the battlefield, Dracula had never experienced anything like this. As he tried to calm his emotions, he suddenly noticed the monster's blood on his sword. Under the sunlight, it mysteriously dissipated as if nothing had happened. Dracula quickly left the cave and returned to the castle. He found Lucian and told him about his experience. Unexpectedly, Lucian didn't seem surprised at all because 4 nights ago, everyone in the church was awakened by the same dream, and the creature in the dream was the same as the one Dracula encountered today. After describing and consulting relevant information, Lucian told Dracula that the monster in the cave was the Master Vampire. In fact, the Master Vampire was originally human. Later, to gain dark power, he summoned a devil from the depths of hell and made a deal with it. Although his wish was fulfilled in the end, he found that he had been deceived by the devil. The price of gaining dark power was that he could only live in darkness for the rest of his life, enjoying the loneliness of eternal life. Only when he found the next person willing to become a vampire could he leave the cave and gain freedom. Dracula then understood that the reason he could escape just now was that vampires feared sunlight. But now the Turks were coveting his land, and Dracula didn't want to cause panic, so he asked Lucian to keep this matter secret. Originally, he thought that as long as he didn't enter the cave, everything would be fine. As a result, Dracula forgot about the Turkish soldiers who had disappeared in his territory. Sure enough, on Easter Day, when everyone was drinking and celebrating, the Turkish envoy suddenly appeared. He came to collect tribute on behalf of Mehmed. Dracula had the prepared silver coins brought out, but the envoy said that Mehmed had new demands this time. Dracula suddenly thought of something and immediately stated that he knew nothing about the Turkish scouts. Unexpectedly, the envoy threatened him with the fact that Dracula had been a hostage before. After all, he was a prince and had never suffered such humiliation. Although he cursed the other party countless times in his heart, he still had to maintain his dignity. Dracula told the envoy to take the money and leave, but the other party said it was not enough.
The Sultan requires 1,000 boys to join his Janissary corps.
Janissaries. He ended that practice years ago.
When a soldier is plucked as a child and raised to know no other life, they will kill without question and die without complaint. Any who are 15 years of age or older will fight in Hungary. Those 10 to 14 will be made ready for the siege on Vienna. The Sultan expects your obedience, after all.
Hearing this news, Dracula was immediately furious. Because he had been through hardships, he didn't want the children in his territory to experience the suffering he had endured and be trained into cold-blooded killing machines. The envoy was indifferent to Dracula's threats and told him to either hand over the people or face the destruction of his country, then left arrogantly. This made Dracula feel very uncomfortable. The minister, fearing that he would really go against Mehmed, immediately came forward to advise him.
It must be done. Courage, anger, even love, none of these can matter to a prince. All that matters is his duty to his people.
That night, Dracula's son Ingarus asked his father if he would hand him over as a hostage. Recalling his childhood when his father sent him to Turkey as a token of loyalty, Dracula felt very uncomfortable. He said he would never do that. After much deliberation, Dracula went to the Turkish army's camp, hoping that his former brother-like friend Mehmed would give him some face. But people change, especially men with power. Although Mehmed said he missed the days when he and Dracula fought side by side, 9 out of 10 sentences were about hostages. As they talked, Mehmed said that Dracula still owed him 1,000 boys. Dracula said he would agree to any condition except this one. Mehmed still insisted that he wanted 1,000 boys, not one less, and also asked Dracula to send his son Ingaras to his side. The boat of friendship capsized easily. Even though Dracula was extremely reluctant under the threat of the Turkish army, he had to break his promise. When they arrived at the agreed place to hand over the hostage, Marina tried to keep her son, Ingaras, but Dracula, as a prince, had no choice. Ingaras knew that his father was in a difficult position and ran up to hold his father's hand tightly. Unexpectedly, the envoy sent by Mehmed, seeing Dracula's choice, suddenly mocked him.
You have chosen wisely. I have to say, we're a little disappointed, frankly. I expected more resistance from you.
In order to prevent the country from being bloodshed, Dracula had to make sacrifices, but he didn't expect to be treated like this. These words deeply hurt him. Looking back at his wife with tears in her eyes, Dracula immediately made a decision. Dracula told Ingaras to run back to his mother's side, while he quickly turned around, drew the envoy's sword, first cut off the other party's arms, made him pay the price for his arrogance, and then swung the next sword. After dealing with the envoy, the accompanying Turkish soldiers were also killed by Dracula. Although he won back Ingaras and his dignity, it was equivalent to declaring war on Turkey. Mehmed's ambition and bloodthirstiness made Dracula decide not to be a vassal anymore. However, the two sides were not only unequal in numbers, but also in military strength. Facing this war with no chance of winning, Dracula could only think of other ideas. After his family left, he looked towards the Broken Cliff Mountain. Maybe to win this victory, he could only rely on the power of darkness. Entering the depths of the cave again, Dracula finally saw the master vampire. Normally, anyone who could leave alive would never come back. So after seeing Dracula, the master vampire's curiosity outweighed his thirst for blood. He pushed aside Dracula's longsword, leaned close to his ear, and said,
Those who enter reek of fear. In you, I sense hope. The silver offends me, cloak it from my sight.
What kind of man crawls into his own grave in search of hope?
A desperate one.
Dracula said that he came here to borrow the power of darkness to resist the Turkish army that was about to attack his country, because only by being strong enough could he protect his people and his wife and children. But these were irrelevant to the master vampire. The only thing he wanted was freedom. However, before agreeing, he needed to confirm one thing. So the master vampire pushed Dracula against the stone wall and asked him what he was thinking when he was killing before he wanted to protect his people now.
Answer me!
I felt nothing a greater crime than the act itself. Then why spill blood not for the pleasure of it? Because men do not fear swords. They fear monsters. They run from them. By putting one village to the stake, I spared 10 more. Sometimes the world no longer needs a hero. Sometimes what it needs is a monster. Believe you know what it is to be a monster.
Hearing that he wanted an answer, the master vampire decided to help Dracula become a real beast. He used his sharp nails to scratch the skin on Dracula's neck. The taste of fresh blood excited the master vampire. After confirming that Dracula was the one who could free him, the master vampire casually picked up a skull, smashed it open, and used it as a container. He bit through the carotid artery with his teeth and let the black blood flow into the skull. As long as he drank it all at once, he could obtain the terrifying power of darkness. The price was that the thirst for blood would be unstoppable, but the master vampire left Dracula a way out. If within 3 days of becoming a vampire, Dracula could control himself and not drink human blood, then when the sun rose, he could regain his human identity. The tempting conditions and safe retreat left Dracula with no reason to refuse. For his family and people, Dracula decisively drank the black blood. In a short while, Dracula's body began to change, and the severe pain made him faint. When he woke up again, he found himself outside the cave. Just as he doubted whether the master vampire had deceived him, a strong burning sensation came from his finger, and Dracula quickly took off the silver ring. Then he struggled to get up, but the supporting stone was easily crushed, and the wound on his palm began to heal rapidly. But the changes in his body were far more than these. When Dracula focused his attention, he found that his sensory functions were infinitely amplified. He could hear the sound of spiders hunting and the animals moving in the forest hundreds of miles away, clear as day. With these special abilities, fighting against the Turkish army was as easy as pie. This was a surefire deal for him. Just as Dracula was marveling at the changes in his body, a huge noise came from the direction of the castle, and the fire in the darkness was unusually bright. It seemed that the Turkish army had arrived, so Dracula began to speed up his return. In the process of running wildly, he unlocked a new skill again. As his body turned into a group of bats, Dracula quickly flew towards the castle. Under the continuous bombardment of artillery fire, the castle began to crumble, and the defending soldiers were beaten to the point of losing their ability to resist. Seeing that the other side was doomed, the Turkish army sent out a vanguard to attack. But at this moment, a man walked out of the smoke. It was Dracula, who had turned into a vampire. Seeing the culprit who destroyed his country, Dracula clenched his fists and said that now he was alone, but he was not afraid. He ran forward and fought against thousands of Turkish soldiers. Soon, the two sides officially met. The Turkish soldiers were all armed with weapons, but Dracula was empty-handed. He rushed into the enemy alone, and his fangs and claws, under his control, exerted the strongest killing power, killing a bloody path. These soldiers were all top-notch, but in Dracula's hands, they were like 3-year-old children. Although he had just turned into a vampire, Dracula had already fully adapted. He sometimes teleported and sometimes turned into a bat, moving flexibly among the enemies. The battle lasted about half an hour from start to finish. The ground was covered with corpses and blood flowed like a river. The only one still alive was Dracula. The reinforcements who arrived late saw this scene and could hardly believe their eyes. Dracula walked up to them and said that although they had won this battle, according to Mehmed's temper, he would not let it go. The following war would only be more cruel. Dracula's record of 1 against 1,000 quickly spread to Mehmed's ears. Originally, he was planning to attack Transylvania, and now he had a legitimate reason. So he immediately ordered the gathering of the army. He would personally lead 100,000 troops to take back Dracula's head. Dracula predicted Mehmed's prediction, so he withdrew from the castle in advance. In Dracula's original plan, 3 days was more than enough. On the way, Dracula gradually felt something was wrong. The vampire's nature made Dracula begin to crave blood desperately. Although he held a silver sword in his hand, he was afraid that he couldn't control himself, so he could only get up and leave. After returning to the tent, his wife Mirena thought he was too nervous, so she comforted him physically. Who knew that in the process of intimacy, Dracula's body changed again? Looking at his wife Mirena's neck, his fangs appeared. In order to force himself to calm down, Dracula could only go to the forest. He didn't expect that it was not quiet here either. A man walked out of the grass. He seemed to know Dracula's identity and pointed to the bats in the sky.
The night is their kingdom. Blood, their sustenance.
After saying that, the man took out a dagger, cut his palm with it, and then brought the fresh blood to Dracula's face. The next second, he was knocked over by Dracula. As long as he could hold on for these 3 days, Dracula could still return to being a normal person. At this moment, Dracula's ears were constantly ringing with the master vampire's words, guiding him to drink blood. In order to distract himself, Dracula sent a gift to Mehmed. Seeing the scene before him, Mehmed remembered Dracula's nickname, Impaler Prince, which made him more determined to destroy Dracula. On the other side, after Mirena woke up, she found Dracula hiding in the blanket, his body trembling violently. When she lifted the blanket and saw that Dracula's once scarred back was now smooth, she was immediately shocked and sat down on the ground. Knowing that the matter could no longer be hidden, Dracula could only tell the truth.
I'm the thing men fear on Broken Tooth.
In fact, in Mirena's heart, Dracula had always been a good husband and father, but she didn't expect that Dracula would make a deal with the master vampire for Ingaras and his people. When she heard Dracula say that as long as he could control himself and not drink blood in the next 2 days, he could still return to being a normal person, Mirena immediately decided to cooperate and hide Dracula's vampire identity. When they set off, Mirena passed a message to Dracula's confidant, saying that Dracula had left first and asked him to continue leading everyone on the road. As a result, they had just left for a short while when they were discovered by Mehmed's men again. That night, in the forest not far from the monastery, the retreating team was ambushed by Turkish soldiers. Fortunately, when the Turkish soldiers were about to attack Mirena, Dracula, who had turned into a bat, arrived. Although Dracula successfully dealt with the other party, his confidant lost his life in this ambush. After experiencing this sudden incident, Dracula finally led everyone to the monastery. Mehmed soon learned about the failure of the ambush. Combined with the situation during this period, he speculated that Dracula might have mutated, so he immediately ordered the soldiers to cover their eyes. Even if their vision was obstructed, they could definitely win in numbers. Thus, 100,000 Turkish soldiers marched towards the monastery in full force. Unexpectedly, before Mehmed could make a move, Dracula was almost burned to death. At the moment Lucian pierced the curtain, the man's face was immediately scorched by the pouring sunlight. The common people who witnessed this scene screamed as if they had seen a ghost. They all raised their torches, trying to completely destroy Dracula, forgetting that Dracula was their leader. Mirena tried to explain, but no one cared. After all, at this moment, vampires were just like the Turkish army, a threat to their lives. Fortunately, after the fire burned, Dracula was not injured. Realizing that his efforts had saved a group of cold-blooded people, his heart ached even more. He asked these people why they were treating him like this, but those who had just spoken harshly were now silent. Seeing Dracula's agitation, Mirena quickly came forward to comfort him. Seeing her distressed look, Dracula could only calm his anger. Even if the common people didn't understand gratitude, at least his lover would believe in him. Thinking that there was still a tough battle to fight with Turkey, Dracula didn't dwell on it anymore. Through his 1,000-mile eye, Dracula saw the Turkish army slowly approaching. Although the vampire's power was strong, the disparity in numbers was too great, and Dracula was not completely confident of winning this war. He told Mirena that if they lost, she should quickly leave with Ingaras. Unexpectedly, Mirena said that she would choose to fight side by side with Dracula until death. The next day, just as dawn broke, Mehmed led 100,000 troops to the foot of the monastery mountain. Looking at the vast sea of people, Dracula began to think about how to respond. At this moment, a bat flew over his head. He followed it unconsciously and came to the highest point of the watchtower. Dracula discovered a dense group of bats. He raised his hand to try to control them. Feeling the call of the dark power, the bats spread their wings and began to chirp. The bats around the nearby mountain peaks were also summoned and began to fly towards the monastery in groups. The dense group of bats circled around the monastery endlessly. At the top of the watchtower, Dracula had already thought of a countermeasure. With a wave of his hand, the bats rushed towards the Turkish army like a dark cloud covering the sky. As he began to clench his fist, the bats also changed their shape again, turning into a giant fist. As Dracula swung his fist forcefully, the giant fist also fell from the sky. This terrifying fatal blow easily destroyed half of the army. In the chaotic crowd, Dracula quickly locked onto Mehmed's position. He immediately turned into a group of bats and leaped from the watchtower. At this time, the army was in chaos, and no one was listening to the command. The bat group knocked Mehmed to the ground, but when Dracula reached out his claws to completely resolve everything, he found that the armored person in front of him was not Mehmed at all. At the same time, inside the monastery, the small Turkish team that had sneaked in successfully found Marina's room. The guard fought back and fought with 3 soldiers. Taking this opportunity, Marina took Ingaras and left the room. They came to the watchtower to find Dracula, but found that he was not here at all. At this moment, a soldier chased after them. He took away Dracula's son Ingaras and then tried to kick Marina off the platform. It was at this moment that Dracula saw Mehmed mixed in the crowd of soldiers. Before he could make a move, he heard Marina's cry for help from the direction of the monastery. He immediately turned into a bat and flew into the sky at high speed. Dracula used all his strength to increase his speed to the limit. After arriving at the watchtower, he successfully dealt with a soldier, who knew that at this moment the sun rose. Dracula lost his strength and collapsed on the ground, watching helplessly as the tiles Marina was holding onto lifted, and then she fell from the sky. The distance that was originally within reach became the farthest gap in their lives. Then, the two fell into the valley together. Seeing that his purpose had been achieved, Mehmed left the battlefield with Dracula's son Ingaras. Without Dracula's protection, the people in the monastery became fish on a chopping board, at the mercy of others. The Turkish soldiers began to massacre. At this time, at the bottom of the valley, Dracula held Marina in despair. Seeing that the sun had not completely risen, Marina asked Dracula to drink her blood. In this way, he would still have a chance to save the people and their son, Ingaras. Under Marina's repeated pleas, Dracula could only endure his grief and bite down with his fangs. At the same time, in the cave of Broken Cliff Mountain, Master Vampire sensed Dracula's changes. Master Vampire, who had been trapped for who knows how long, finally walked towards the sunlight in the cave. After calming down, Dracula returned to the monastery where corpses were everywhere. The surviving people no longer had the vitality of the past. Dracula asked them if they wanted revenge. After getting an affirmative answer, Dracula, following Master Vampire's example, bit his own wrist and dripped his blood into their mouths. At the same time, in the Turkish military camp, the soldiers were immersed in the joy of victory, completely forgetting the terror of the dark power. Suddenly, the sky began to darken, and lightning struck without warning, as if something was slowly approaching the camp. As the lightning got closer and closer, the soldiers could see Dracula's figure below with the help of the light. As the Bat Group rushed into the camp, the third-generation vampires who had drunk Dracula's blood also appeared and joined the battle. Once a vampire tasted blood, their desire to kill and thirst for blood would be infinitely amplified. Coupled with the fact that their wounds would heal automatically, they only needed to charge forward with all their might. His target was Mehmed. Unexpectedly, as soon as Dracula entered the tent, he found that Mehmed was already prepared. Under the stimulation of the silver arrows, Dracula's vision was affected. Not only that, but the ground of the tent was also covered with silver coins. However, even if his abilities were suppressed, Dracula never thought of retreating. The pain made him more determined to kill Mehmed and avenge his wife. Then the two of them each held their weapons and prepared to fight. Although Mehmed was no match for Dracula in terms of strength, Dracula's every move was visibly slowed down due to the suppression of the vampire's body by the silverware. His strength was also weakened compared to before. Seeing that his method was effective, Mehmed continued to cut down the hanging bags. As the silver coins continued to scatter, Dracula was in extreme pain. Mehmed then suddenly launched an attack. Seeing Mehmed slowly approaching his father Dracula, Ingaras was extremely anxious. Dracula saw his son Ingaras's helpless and painful expression. He thought of his wife's last words and began to concentrate the dark power in his body. At this moment, Mehmed walked in and took out a wooden stake, wanting to pierce it into Dracula's heart. Just as he was about to deliver the fatal blow, Dracula suddenly grabbed it. Although there was still a distance between them, under the stimulation of the wooden stake, Dracula's armor began to rot and dissipate. Just as the wooden stake was about to pierce through the armor, Dracula concentrated his power and turned into a bat. Catching Mehmed off guard, he turned and stabbed the wooden stake into his body. In the second before Mehmed's death, Dracula stretched out his fangs and bit into his neck. Later, Dracula took Ingress out of the tent and found that the tens of thousands of troops outside had been slaughtered by the small team of third-generation vampires. The thirst for blood and the pleasure brought by killing had driven the third-generation vampires completely crazy. Seeing Ingress, they all surrounded him and tried to kill their savior again and then drain Ingress's blood. Dracula quickly raised his spear and pierced it through the heart of his subordinate. Then he hung the subordinate in the air. Under the restraint of the wooden stake, the subordinate's body quickly began to rot. In just a few seconds, the flesh and blood all over his body disappeared, leaving only a skeleton. Dracula tried to scare other vampires by killing one, but the rest, cornered and blood-craving, bared fangs to fight to the death. Fortunately, in the critical moment, the previous Lucian appeared with a cross in his hand, which was the most feared thing by vampires. Wearing the cross, Lucian came to Dracula's side and asked him to hand Ingress over to him. In this situation, Dracula had no choice. On the one hand, he could not guarantee Ingress's safety. On the other hand, he wanted to atone for his sins because it was his desire for revenge that created so many bloodthirsty demons. After Ingress was handed over to Lucian, Dracula looked up at the sky and said,
"He's safe now, Marina."
After completing everything, Dracula decided to die to atone for his sins. He released all his power and dispersed the clouds blocking the sun. When the sunlight shone again on this battlefield full of bloodshed and killing, the third-generation vampires were also burned by the sun at the same time, turning into ashes and disappearing. After looking at the direction where Ingress left for the last time, Dracula also fell heavily to the ground. Later, with Lucian's assistance, Ingress inherited Dracula's throne. But no one knew that, after everyone had forgotten about the vampires, the mysterious man from the forest appeared again. He cut his wrist and dripped his blood into Dracula's mouth. In the next second, Dracula's already rotten skin suddenly began to recover flesh and elasticity, and the already dead Dracula opened his eyes again, welcoming his new life. Several centuries later, Dracula was no longer afraid of sunlight. He walked on the bustling streets and accidentally met a woman who was very similar to his wife. The wheel of fate began to turn again. Dracula took the initiative to talk to her. The pull of fate brought the two closer. Just as they turned to leave, the master vampire, who had long left the cave, also stood up and followed them, saying meaningfully,
Let the games begin.